Hey, you. Did you know that the general election is right around the corner on November 3rd? And I'm sure you've been keeping up with the issues, right? Well, hopefully, you've been following the issues that are important to you and the people you care about so that you don't look like this when someone asks you what the hot issues are. Thank goodness for Pew Research and their survey asking registered voters what is very important to their vote in the 2020 election. Topping the list was the economy, followed by health care, and the third most important issue being Supreme Court appointments. Now, there may be some of us out there who don't have a care in the world and aren't following the issues, but now is not the time to be checked out. You should be reading, studying the issues, watching debates, and looking at the voting records of the candidates to see if their voting record on issues reflects your interest. Because if you don't keep in touch with what's happening and you vote blindly, or you don't vote at all, then you lose your right to complain about anything. Good evening. This is Dr. Michelle Pierce Mobley, and I want to welcome you to the Tabernacle Baptist Church Voter Education Series. And I am so pleased that our guest today is LeRonda Jackson. Good evening, LeRonda.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, and I'm glad that you agreed to come and talk about some of the hot and pressing issues that we believe are going to be extremely important to voters during the 2020 general election. So we've got quite a few questions and things we want to cover. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Our economy was beginning to recover from the 2008 recession under Obama. He did a tremendous job in helping the economy recover, and then we were hit with the pandemic. What actions do you think are going to be needed for the next candidate to be able to address, to be able to reinstill confidence in the American people?
Oh, good question. It's going to have to be jobs. It's going to have to be great jobs, not some of the lower paying jobs. We're going to have like a strong out the gate push as soon as we kind of get our arms wrapped around the pandemic. I think the most pressing issue is definitely going to be jobs, getting people back to work.
Well, another issue is certainly going to be the health care system. We know that the United States and the individuals here, we spend over $4 trillion annually just on health care. So if you were talking to one of the candidates, what type of concerns do you think need to be addressed during this next season?
You know, health care is, that's my profession. And, because we live in a capitalistic society, our healthcare companies and our insurance companies, they're for profits. And it's really tough because we understand that health insurance is not a commodity. It's a necessity that every American should have. So there's always a collision right there. But I definitely think that our federal government, even our state government, can do more to bring those costs down. They can subsidize some things that they're not currently subsidizing. They can help us with prescription drug costs. So those are some issues I think need to be worked on. And then me personally, I'm a big advocate for prevention. We don't see a lot of attention on preventive type treatment and maintenance. Yes, ladies get an annual checkup and those kind of things, but I'm talking about real prevention, like free memberships to gyms. I'm talking about food care costs, where a family can go get a fast food meal for dirt cheap, and it's usually unhealthy. And so then that drives us to have more health conditions. So I think that there can be some reverse pricing and stuff, the way we're even marketed as far as when we go to the grocery store and when we go out to eat. I think all of that plays into healthcare and costs.
Wonderful. Well, I want to switch our focus to, obviously everybody's talking about COVID-19 and the impact that it's had not just to the local but the regional and the global economy. What type of priorities should our legislators be giving to resolve the significant economic impact that COVID-19 has had? If you had to come up with a list of things they need to do, what would be on that list?
Well, as a small business owner, and we play a significant role in jobs and the economy, there's going to have to be special attention made. There are some businesses who are saying they're not going to reopen, and maybe there's a way to get them back. There are some people just kind of holding on, trying to see how things are going to pan out over the next 6 months, 12 months. So I really think jobs specifically, and then even to narrow that down, I would say small businesses, we have got to bring them back to life, especially the ones that we've lost.
Well, I want to switch gears a little bit. We now know that diversity and inclusion training is under attack at the federal level, and I believe the term has been used that it's un-American propaganda. What responsibility do you think the government plays in the education of its employees and its citizens on matters of race and equity?
Wow. The government, when we look at the responsibility or role of government to educate, I don't know that they're equipped to educate because I don't know that they get it. But I would say, of course, inclusion, diversity, the terms that are just thrown around out here now, they need to become real and they need to manifest from the government down. When you look at implicit bias, there are some things that people just don't get because they've never known that that was offensive. They've never been taught that that was offensive. So when we look at what the federal government's role should be, I think that they should at least continue to check the numbers. They need to make sure that minorities and women and people of color still have a fighting chance when it comes to opening a business, when it comes to being a contractor for the government or anything like that. I think we definitely need to keep that. But I would say we've got to do more diversity training.
I would definitely
at the top.
I would definitely agree with
Yeah.
that, and I would think in this season of post George Floyd's murder and all of the protests, peaceful protests, by the way, that have been occurring across the globe, you're now beginning to see many of these media outlets referring to the protests as riots. How do you see the landscape changing for protests in this country?
I don't know that they're going to change. Most of the things that have occurred in this country and throughout the world have come through protesting, pressure, demanding change. I don't know that people do the right thing because it's the right thing. I think that it has always taken pressure, whether it's women voting, blacks voting, whatever the laws that we look at in the amendments to the Constitution, they were usually caused by pressure. So I'm hoping that civil unrest continues. We have to just recognize those protests that have gone on since George Floyd's death. Most of them have been peaceful, but what we see on TV are fires and damage and vandalism and looting. We had protests here in our community. All of them were fine. So I hope that our protests don't change. I just pray that the narrative is told correctly. And then there are people who are hired to come out and cause problems. Those people need to be apprehended.
Absolutely agree with that. Man has been a steward of a lot of resources, and on most things, I would say we do pretty well. We have probably not been the best environmental stewards. So when we look at areas around clean and safe drinking water, or just clean air to breathe, what type of positions are you going to be looking at for a candidate when they're talking about environmental concerns?
Well, at least, don't deny that we have some global issues going on, global warming and different things like that. And so it's obvious with the type of storms that we have and the fires and just the things that are going on. But look at our drinking water. So when you look at Flint, Michigan, what was behind that? Greed. When you look at most of the things that occur when companies pollute our air or when they pollute our grounds or our waters, it's always profit motive. It's cheaper to do it that way. So I really see that greed is the major culprit here. So I'm hoping that the next president takes that into serious consideration. You know, even here in Ohio, we have we have millions of dollars protecting Lake Erie, and it takes that. You know, you just have to be mindful and have lawmakers who are mindful.
Great response. We've always been a nation of immigrants, and this has always been the land where people came to seek asylum from oppression. And we now see a pretty rational justification of children being placed in cages. What would you say to our leaders and our officials in terms of changing the mindset that we now seem to despise immigrants?
Wow. You know, when you look at the Statue of Liberty, give us your tired and give us, you know, the different oppressed people that come here. And then, you know, there are certain people in America, we don't want them. And I think that it's about power. I think it's about control. I think it's a lot of white rage. And I think it's a lot of racism. And when I see a child in a cage, it angers me. You know, I know that there has to be a pathway to citizenship. That pathway should be a little faster maybe than it is, and it should be clear. But if someone does come here and they don't follow the procedures, then there has to be a proper procedure. And I think it's inhumane to take children from their parents and then send them away anyway. Then you need to send them away as a family. And so I can't think of anything worse than separating a child from their parent. But, you know, not to be mean or anything, but look at slavery. You know, that was one of the things that was done. You know, you rip a child away from its mom,
Yes.
and that mom is broken, never to be whole again. And so we just got to do better. We have to demand. That's why it's so important that we vote. And that is why we have to know the issues. We cannot be just lullabied with TV commercials. We've got to know the issues.
Well, I know one of the top issues has been law enforcement and their interactions with citizens, particularly when it comes to issues of excessive force. What should we be looking at in our leaders in terms of interactions with the police, police reform? Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that's going to be a huge issue this election cycle.
Police reform. So, you know, it's really tough. I'm not saying defund the police and take away all monies and resources that they need to operate. But I do not think they need a SWAT mobile, and I don't think that they need military equipment. That's money that can be used in mental health and some of the other areas and in building our communities again. But at the end of the day, when you look at how George Floyd lost his life, there is no training that would remind a man, you're killing someone. You're taking his last breath away by having your knee on his neck. That's not a training issue. That is a person who should have never been in law enforcement. So for me, my personal opinion, of course, we're hearing all about this training, but you have to know how to not hire bad officers. And so that is first. So I don't want to know, I don't care about what you're going to do after you find out you have a bad officer, or after he's already taken a life or just abused someone. I want to know, what did you do? What made you think that person was great to be a police officer in the first place? Did you do psychological evaluations? Did you run really good employment history? Did you check their social media pages? There has to be more done up front, on the front end, before just hiring these people who obviously don't care. They've been known to be part of some really mean groups, some white nationalists and just different hate groups, and they're on the police force. And being on the police force, as far as law enforcement, you know, they pretty much can do what they want to do.
Well, I think it's extremely sad. I just recently read that the officer that fatally shot Breonna Taylor was recently hired by the Cincinnati Police Department. And so when you are able to commit such a violation, a gross violation of your own policies, to the point that your department fires you, and then you're able to be picked up by another department, that is certainly a subject, I think, for reform, that you lose the right to carry a gun and be able to protect
Definitely.
citizens when you kill innocent citizens.
Definitely. And even so, he hasn't been arrested, he hasn't been charged, he hasn't been convicted. And so in America, you are innocent until proven guilty. So perhaps Cincinnati didn't need to hire him now until he was cleared of everything.
Yes.
So I think that was a bad move, and I think that's why people protest. But I think the right amount of pressure, maybe they'll rethink their decision. I remember when Tamir Rice was killed, and the officer that killed him had gotten another job basically right up the road, and the people fussed, and they really put the pressure, they applied pressure until that he was terminated. So I think that if that's, and I apologize, I didn't know that, but we need to apply pressure to the city of Cincinnati.
It takes quite a bit of money to run for political office. And so now you see individuals, maybe because they have the financial resources and means and not necessarily the best character, running for office. And you're also starting to see now public officials use those dollars to support lifestyles that their actual salaries don't support. What changes do you think need to happen in terms of campaign finance reform?
Well, there are limits on what you can receive and who you can receive it from, but I think that there has to be serious crackdown when those violations are clear. So here, even in Ohio, we have a pay-to-play, corruption, racketeering, bribery from energy, energy company wanting a bailout, and so they were willing to pay for it. And we saw some legislators, their votes were bought. So I think that it's really sad, it's disheartening, because the public already does not trust politicians. And when you betray that trust, you never really had it in the first place, and then when you turn around and you betray it, I think that you need to find something else to do. So when it comes to campaign finance, there's a lot of money in it, and you really are marketing yourself. So even when Bloomberg was running, and everyone was like, he's spending all this money and he's doing this. Well, it was his money.
Yes.
He wasn't begging like you see a lot of people who are running for office do. And because we're so influenced by what we see, you look at some of the commercials on TV, a 60-second commercial might be $30,000, $40,000. And when you see that commercial over and over and over again, you know how much money was spent. So unfortunately, until we learn how to run for office differently, I really don't see it changing. You're really paying to get your name and your face out there. You're almost buying a vote.
Well, let's talk about wealth. The wealthiest 1% of Americans possess about 40% of the nation's wealth. So how do we address the ever-increasing wealth gap in this country?
Well, I have so many opinions on that. I definitely think people need to earn a living wage. I pay more. I pay a lot more than minimum wage. I pay 80% of her health care. If I can do that as a small business, other companies can do that. So when you start dipping into their profit margins and their stockholders and things like that, they don't like that. But I definitely believe we start with wages. If you look at education and the cost of education, we are trying to price education where people who don't make a lot of money, where it's not even an option. And that's sad to me, very sad. So the wealth gap continues to grow. Education is currently almost like currency, and we just keep pushing it away from people instead of making it easier. We make it harder, and that is not, I don't know, I just think there's one particular party that continues to do that. I also look at credit and credit reform and credit issues. When people have bad credit, or I won't say bad, lower credit scores, they pay more. Their interest rate is higher. Instead of saying, well, you know, they're already struggling, so let me help them out, we almost gouge them even more. And I think that that's a terrible way to live. That's a terrible society, and it's a terrible philosophy. So I think that we should really look at how we treat people and how we treat credit. Just credit, period, is hurting a lot of people.
Well, that's
It's intentional.
That's
to
an
me.
interesting point you bring up, because with COVID and its impact on the economy and many people that had job loss that was no fault of their own, it will be very interesting to see how the credit bureaus respond in terms of those credit ratings. So you bring up an excellent point. Okay, United States, this is my beef because I've been watching too much television about voting and how people vote, or they're mail in, not mail in. We sent a man to the moon, but we are still struggling with voting in this country. And we're supposed to be the most sophisticated superpower in the world. But yet we're still arguing about how many mailboxes and if we can sustain mail-in votes. What do we need to do to change the overall voting process in the United States?
Well, first, we need legislators who care about votes being counted and who care about people having access to the polls. I don't know that they care. I don't see any evidence that they care. And I still see a lot of voter suppression. To me, voter suppression is real. It might not be like it was in the 60s, but it's real. I don't know why we're not voting online. You can do everything else online. You can receive a particular number that's coded and everything to make sure that it's secure. People should be able to vote online. If nothing else, I mean, just look at here in Ohio. Look at the primary we had. It was a debacle. It was a mess. The dates were off. There was confusion. People didn't know how to turn their ballots in. Everybody don't have postage stamps at home, and then people had to go out and buy envelopes or buy stamps. It was just a mess, and I don't know that November 3rd is going to be any different. So even right now in Ohio, we have an issue with, should people be able to mail their ballot back in and receive a postage-paid envelope to send their ballot back? Well, of course. But we see these little song and dance, wasting time. Now we're 50 days out. That was a decision. He should have I'm sorry. That's a hot button. We knew at the primary what the general was going to look like. We shouldn't even be having these conversations. This should have been done in April or May, not September and October, still arguing on how are people's votes going to be counted. So I honestly, I can't say that they care that votes are counted. We're told vote is important, it's important. We say it to our children, but I think that the supermajority does not want everyone to vote, because then they will be outnumbered. And so I think they're okay with the chaos. I think it's controlled chaos, and it's ridiculous.
Well, I agree with you. It's controlled chaos, because we know in the last general election, 91 million people chose not to vote. So even in spite of all the money and the resources that are applied to voting, we're still not reaching a vast majority of people to be able to participate in the process. So I look for there to be significant discussion on improving this process, because it's a little embarrassing in this country when you hear all the discussions about postage and mailing ballots. It's embarrassing.
Or people that don't know how to complete the absentee ballot. Just look at here in Montgomery County, if you want to drop your ballot off, there's one ballot box for the whole entire county. That's ridiculous.
Wow. Okay, well, I have one final question for you.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
I guess it's COVID related, but
Okay.
I think because of the significant number of jobs that have been lost as a result of COVID, a lot of individuals who never had to have experience with the unemployment system found out just how arduous it is to navigate that system. Some people, of course, never received benefits, and it was a huge impact to the actual individuals who had to monitor those processes. What would you say to some of those families that rely on those type of supports and safeguards? And what kind of message should we be sending to our legislature relative to unemployment?
I would say to those families, don't give up. Call every day. I know you get tired of it. Call every day. Call your state rep. If they don't call you back, call your state senator. Call your U.S. rep. Just make the calls. I mean, you have to stay in their face, and it's unfortunate that you have to do that, but you just have to, and we need to fight. And those of us who are not perhaps laid off, we need to get in the fight with them and not let them fight by themselves. I think, there's power in numbers, and evictions is going to be a major issue if we don't wrap our arms around that and provide the resources. So, we need to get the money from the federal government, and they just need to make it work.
Well, I think I certainly have to applaud the employees and the staff who had to process those claims, because I could not imagine having double-digit unemployment like they had to experience, and people were just desperate looking for help. And those individuals were also, their families were impacted as well. So I think it becomes very difficult when you work in a service economy and you're not laid off work, you're still having to go to work and having to service that many people that just became so desperate. So
I agree, but look what we did to healthcare. I have a friend who's been in Texas for a couple of months. She had to go to New York. We pulled everything we could out of our healthcare professionals during COVID.
yes.
No days off, 12-hour days, 14-hour days, and then they fear getting sick themselves. If we did that to the healthcare professionals, we need to do that until everybody gets their unemployment proceeds, period.
Okay. Thank you, LeRonda. I want to thank you for going over these hot button topics,
you're
because I
welcome.
think these are the questions that voters need to be asking themselves in terms of where the candidates stand on these important issues. I know I'm going to be paying really close attention to environmental issues. I'm going to be paying attention to infrastructure issues, because I think we found during this season a lot of the safeguards that we thought we had in place had been dismantled.
Correct.
And look at the catastrophic loss that we're experiencing because of that. I want to thank you.
And let me just
again.
add this, we as voters, we have to learn how to connect the dots. And I think that that's where the communication breaks down. I think that's when people give up, because they don't really know what this person's role is. They really don't know what their rights are. They don't know what a congressperson does. You can read some of the things on social media and some of the comments. Well, why are these businesses closing over here? And they're mad at totally the wrong person. So I really wish there was a way that we could get educated as a public on just who does what, whose responsibility is what, so we could connect the dots.
Well, I have to say, I would applaud any public official who understood the impact that COVID has had, particularly on people of color, 4 times more likely to be hospitalized, 2 times more likely to die.
Yes.
And I think because somebody connected those dots, they understood it couldn't be business as usual, because the impact to certain citizens was going to be significantly greater than other citizens. And so
Exactly.
I have to applaud those politicians who connected
And now what
those
do we do
dots.
with it? Now that we know that,
Yes.
what are we going to do about it?
What are we going to do?
Yes.
I'm with you.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in for another edition of our Voters Education Series. I hope that you found the information enlightening, and go back and do your own research. This is just me and LeRonda talking. You may have a completely different take on some of these things,
true.
but at least be an informed person when you vote, that you're not just following names, you're following issues and the people that are paying attention to the things that affect you and your lives and your family's lives the most.
Yes.
So I want to say good night. Thanks for tuning in.